7 Years' War and Pontiac's War. Let's get into it. So, the 7 Years' War is also called the French and Indian War, and it took place from 1754 to 1763. And you might be like, hey, that's 9 years. Yup. Um, a part of why the British term it the 7 Years' War is because they didn't officially declare war until 2 years in case you were wondering if my math was really that bad. It's not me. So, some of the root causes, we see maritime and colonial conflict between Britain and France and Spain. And this spanned all over where colonial arms reached, right? So, we are talking India, Europe, as well as the colonies. So, or I'll say the British colonies, the British American colonies. Got to be specific, right? Because Britain is out here colonizing, okay? And so in Europe, there's also conflict between Frederick II of Prussia, as well as his opponents, Austria, France, Russia, and Sweden. And so we're going to focus on the American colonial aspect of the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. Just because this is a course that focuses on the United States, right? So there were ongoing frontier tensions in North America between the French and the British over control of the Ohio Territory. And we see the French and the British rushing into the region to build forts and to establish a military presence in order to solidify their colonial claims to the area. And so, North American versus. So we see the French and their indigenous allies fighting the British and their indigenous allies. And so I figured maybe we should know who some of those people are, right? And here we see pro-war propaganda that speaks to the colonies as being severed portions of a snake, right? And it says join or die, speaking to get involved in this here French and Indian War. So on one side, we have the British and the Mohegan, who were actually former allies of the French, but the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Catawba Nation, even the Cherokee Nation participating for 1 year, the Lenape, and the Mohawk. On the French side, we see the Huron, the Shawnee, the Odawa, the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Ojibwe, the Mohawks, and the Abenaki. And so this whole thing officially kicks off stateside, or non-stateside, colony side, because you have a young 21-year-old George Washington who was sent on behalf of the Virginia colony to build a fort at the forks of the Ohio River in what is modern-day Pittsburgh. And so when Washington and his small force of Virginians and indigenous allies attacked a French reconnaissance party, the French drove them out of their fort back into Virginia. Additional fighting ensued. And so some of the outcomes of the 7 Years' War, we see a Treaty of Paris being issued in 1763, and as a result, Great Britain received an enormous territorial gain in North America, in that they got most of Canada from France, and they also got Florida from Spain. However, I feel like financially, France kind of comes up in this situation in the sense that they get the highly profitable sugar colonies of Martinique and Guadeloupe. Of course, Native American tribes, I will argue, get the short end of the stick, per usual, unfortunately. And we see the indigenous tribes of the region rejecting the notion that France had the authority to cede their lands to the British. They're like, this isn't your land to give to the British. What are you doing, right? All of this is a farce. And we also see heightened tensions between the British and its North American colonies over expansion, taxation, and also relationships with indigenous populations. And so France abandoned its outpost at Fort Detroit, which is in present-day Michigan. The British took over Fort Detroit and imposed changes that dissatisfied the various indigenous tribes that had inhabited the Great Lakes region and also had allied themselves traditionally with France. But unlike the French, the British were not invested in maintaining good relations with indigenous peoples. And so Native Americans had grown accustomed to hunting with weapons and ammunition that were originally supplied by the French. However, the British refused to supply arms to Native Americans, which had a negative impact on their ability to even hunt. This leads to an uprising, right, which is known as Pontiac's War or Pontiac's Uprising. And so we have Pontiac, who was a leader of the Odawa, which the Odawa peoples were located in the modern day area of Toronto and also the Great Lakes region. And so in May of 1763, Pontiac leads an army of 300 men from different tribes to seize Fort Detroit. Unfortunately, the British commander of Fort Detroit had learned of their plot and was able to put down the siege, but Native American resistance tripled. So under Pontiac, Native American tribes launched attacks on British settlements and military outposts and managed to capture 8 out of 11 British forts in the Ohio Valley. And so the outcome of Pontiac's War, July 25th, 1766, we see Pontiac and the British Superintendent of Indian Affairs negotiating to end the war. And Pontiac's uprising demonstrated the viability of pan-tribal cooperation and the struggle against European territorial expansionism, and also contributed to the deterioration of relationships between Great Britain and its North American colonies, as well as, I will argue, the deterioration of relations between North American colonists as well as indigenous peoples. And a part of why you have Great Britain and North American colonists' relationships deteriorating was tied to the Royal Proclamation of 1763, where it prohibited American colonists from settling west of Appalachia. This right here is the proclamation line of 1763. If you see my cursor. The British really hoped to neutralize conflict between white settlers and indigenous people. However, what they did instead was they provoked the wrath of the colonists, who cited the Proclamation of 1763 as just one of the grievances that actually led to the American Revolution. All right, and this concludes our discussion on colonial society. I hope you guys take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful rest of your day.